Well, no one trusts Littlefinger, and Littlefinger has no friends. And that's true of television show Littlefinger. But it's certainly not true of book Littlefinger. If book Littlefinger in the book, everybody trusts him.
George R.R. Martin said this when discussing the differences between his books and the HBO adaptation, and it's one of the most revealing statements about how drastically the show changed a character. In the show, Littlefinger is obviously sinister from the start. Everyone knows he's scheming. No one trusts him. He's transparently Machiavellian, and it's clear to viewers and characters alike that he's dangerous. But in the books, Littlefinger is everybody's friend. People depend on him, trust him, find him useful and harmless. And that's exactly what makes him the most dangerous player in the game. Martin explicitly states that book and show Littlefinger are the most different character between the two versions. And understanding that difference reveals everything about why book Littlefinger is so much more terrifying than his television counterpart. Let's examine Martin's explanation of who Littlefinger really is in the books, how the show changed him, why that change matters, and what it reveals about different approaches to depicting Machiavellian characters. The origin, a nobody who became everybody's friend. I think some of the most Machiavellian characters in Game of Thrones are those who aren't born to the great families. A character like Petyr Baelish, Littlefinger, who is the treasurer or master of coin, as we call it, of the realm when the books open. Martin begins by establishing Littlefinger's fundamental position. He's not born to power. He has to climb to it. Although he's born to a noble house, it's a very weak noble house. His lands are a few acres and a kind of rundown tower house, and he has a lot of sheep and sheep pellets. That's his inheritance. This is crucial context. Littlefinger isn't a commoner, but he's so far below the great houses that he might as well be. His noble title is technically legitimate but practically worthless. The Starks have the entire north. The Lannisters have the wealthiest region in Westeros. The Tyrells control the breadbasket of the realm. Littlefinger has a rundown tower and some sheep. So how does someone born to nothing but sheep pellets become master of coin, one of the most powerful positions in the Seven Kingdoms?
But he has his mind, and he has subtlety, and he climbs and he maneuvers. And
this is the foundation of book Littlefinger's power. Not military strength, not birthright, not wealth, at least not initially, just intelligence, subtlety, and the patient accumulation of power through making himself indispensable. The strategy, financial gene beneath notice. He has great skill with finances, which is something that a lot of the higher-born nobles consider beneath them. Worrying about money and stuff like that. This is the key to understanding Littlefinger's entire strategy. The high-born nobles don't care about money management. They consider it beneath their dignity. Lords like Ned Stark worry about honor. Warriors like Robert Baratheon care about glory. Nobles like Tywin Lannister focus on family legacy and political maneuvering. But the actual management of finances, the boring work of balancing budgets and raising funds, that's work for lesser men. Work that high-born nobles delegate to people they consider beneath them. And that's exactly where Littlefinger thrives. So he's able to accumulate more and more money and more power. Because the nobles don't pay attention to finances, they don't notice Littlefinger accumulating wealth. They don't see him building his own power base through economic manipulation. They just see a helpful man who's good at raising money when they need it. A useful functionary, not a threat. This invisibility is his greatest weapon. The mask, everybody's helpful friend. Befriending everyone. He's everybody's friend. He's always very helpful, and people find him very useful to their schemes. This is the crucial difference between book and show Littlefinger. In the books, he's not obviously sinister. He's friendly, charming, helpful.
He helps Ned Stark when he comes to town. He helps Tyrion. He helps the Lannisters. He's always ready to help, to raise money. He helps Robert. Robert depends on him to finance all of his banquets and tournaments and his other follies, because Littlefinger can always raise money.
Look at this list. Littlefinger helps everyone. He helps Ned Stark. When Ned arrives in King's Landing, Littlefinger offers information, guidance, assistance. Ned has no reason to distrust him. He helps Tyrion. When Tyrion needs allies or information, Littlefinger is cooperative and useful. He helps the Lannisters. Despite not being aligned with them politically, he makes himself useful to Cersei and the family. He helps Robert Baratheon. The king depends on him completely to finance the crown's extravagances. He helps everybody, which means everybody finds him useful, which means nobody sees him as a threat.
So he's everybody's friend.
This repeated phrase, everybody's friend, is key. Not pretends to be everybody's friend. Not seems like everybody's friend. He is everybody's friend, in the sense that he genuinely helps them accomplish their goals. The brilliance is that he's helping multiple people with conflicting interests. He's simultaneously useful to rivals. And because everyone thinks he's just a helpful functionary, nobody realizes he's playing them all. The deception, seeming powerless.
If book Littlefinger in the book, everybody trusts him. Everybody trusts him because he seems powerless.
This is the masterstroke of book Littlefinger's strategy. He actively cultivates an appearance of powerlessness. He comes from a weak house. He has no armies. He has no great family backing him. He's just a financial administrator, a glorified accountant. Why would anyone fear a man whose only skill is raising money? Everybody trusts him. Everybody depends on him. He's not a threat. He's just this helpful, funny guy who you can call upon to do whatever you want and to raise money. Notice Martin's description. Helpful, funny guy. Not sinister schemer. Not obvious villain. A helpful, funny guy. In the books, Littlefinger has a sense of humor. He makes jokes. He's charming. He puts people at ease. And because he seems harmless, because he seems like just a useful tool rather than a player in his own right, people completely underestimate him. He ingratiates himself with people and rises higher and higher as a result. This is classic Machiavellian strategy. Make yourself indispensable, seem unthreatening, accumulate power slowly and invisibly while everyone else fights openly. And it works brilliantly, because nobody is watching the helpful funny guy with the sheep. The truth, most Machiavellian player, he gets everybody's ear. He gets involved in all these plots. He's probably the most Machiavellian character in the Game of Thrones. Martin identifies Littlefinger as the most Machiavellian character in the entire series. Not Varys, not Tywin, not Cersei, Littlefinger. Why? Because he's mastered the art of manipulation through seeming harmlessness. But of course, there's the Machiavellian thing. Everybody trusts him. Everybody depends on him. He's not a threat. Of course, there's the Machiavellian thing. Martin says this almost as an aside, as if it's obvious that the helpful funny guy is actually the most dangerous player. And that's exactly Littlefinger's genius. He operates in plain sight while remaining invisible, because he's trusted, because he's depended upon, because he seems harmless. He can be involved in everyone's plots. He can hear everyone's secrets. He can manipulate everyone's plans, and nobody suspects him because he's just that helpful guy who raises money. The show version, transparently sinister. But book Littlefinger and television show Littlefinger are very different characters. They're probably the character that's most different from the book to the television show. Martin explicitly identifies Littlefinger as the most changed character between mediums. This isn't a minor difference in characterization. This is a fundamental transformation. There was a line in a recent episode of the show where he's not even present, but two people were talking about him, and someone said, "Well, no one trusts Littlefinger, and Littlefinger has no friends." This line, "No one trusts Littlefinger, and Littlefinger has no friends," perfectly encapsulates show Littlefinger. In the show, everyone knows he's scheming. From his first appearances, Aidan Gillen plays him as obviously sinister. The voice, the mannerisms, the knowing smirks. No one trusts him. Characters openly express suspicion. They know he's playing games. They just don't know which games. He has no real friends. People use him, but nobody depends on him the way they do in the books. Nobody thinks he's harmless. He's transparently manipulative. His schemes are often obvious to both characters and viewers. We see him plotting. We see him being sinister. This makes show Littlefinger less threatening, not more. Because if everyone knows you're a snake, they watch you carefully. They don't trust you. They don't depend on you. You lose the invisibility that makes you truly dangerous. Why the show made this change? The show's change wasn't arbitrary. There are practical reasons for making Littlefinger more obviously villainous. Visual medium limitations. In books, Martin can tell us Littlefinger seems harmless, while showing us he's dangerous. In television, actors have to convey character through performance. Playing harmless might make him forgettable. Audience clarity. Television audiences need to track multiple storylines quickly. Making Littlefinger obviously sinister helps viewers remember he's a threat, even when he's not on screen for episodes at a time. Dramatic tension. Viewers enjoy watching a villain scheme. Making Littlefinger's villainy visible creates dramatic irony. We know he's plotting, even when characters don't. Performance choice. Aidan Gillen is a talented actor who made strong choices about how to play the character. Those choices emphasized menace and mystery rather than charm and helpfulness. These are all valid creative decisions for adapting a complex character to television, but they fundamentally change who Littlefinger is and how he operates. What's lost? The invisible threat. By making Littlefinger obviously sinister, the show loses something crucial: the horror of the invisible threat. Book Littlefinger is terrifying precisely because nobody sees him coming. He's the danger hiding in plain sight, the enemy you trust because he's so helpful. When Ned Stark gets betrayed by Littlefinger in the books, it's genuinely shocking, because Ned had no reason to suspect him. Littlefinger had been nothing but helpful. He seemed like an ally, not an enemy. In the show, when Littlefinger betrays Ned, it's less shocking, because we, and arguably Ned, already knew he was untrustworthy. The betrayal is expected. The book version also captures something true about real-world manipulation. The most dangerous people often don't seem dangerous. They seem helpful, friendly, useful. They're the person everyone depends on, the one everyone confides in, the friend who's always there to help. And that's exactly what makes them so effective at manipulation. Because by the time you realize they're playing you, they already know all your secrets and you've given them all your trust. The Machiavelli connection. Cunning over force. It's tough to be a ruler, whether in Machiavelli's time or today, or in the Middle Ages or any time in between. I wanted to reflect some of this realistic thing. People facing very difficult choices, where it's not enough just to say, I will be good and wise and do the right thing. Martin explicitly connects Littlefinger to Machiavelli. And understanding Machiavelli's actual philosophy helps explain why Book Littlefinger works so well. Machiavelli's The Prince isn't actually about being obviously evil. It's about understanding power and using whatever methods work, including appearing virtuous while being ruthless. Key Machiavellian principles that Book Littlefinger embodies. It is better to be feared than loved, but best to be both. Littlefinger manages to be loved, trusted, depended upon, while secretly accumulating the power to be feared. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. Littlefinger has no military strength, no defense from wolves, but excels at cunning and avoiding traps. The fox's skill. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. Littlefinger has no armies, so he wins everything through manipulation and deception. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that one who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Littlefinger succeeds because he makes himself necessary, and people who need him don't look too closely at his true motives. Show Littlefinger loses most of these advantages by being obviously untrustworthy. Book Littlefinger embodies them perfectly. The Joffrey example. When harshness fails, Martin uses Joffrey as a counterexample to show that being ruthless isn't always strategic. I think very convincingly that Joffrey, the teenage boy king, in an effort to show how strong he was and how you defied him at your peril, executed Eddard Stark at the end of the first book, and this is a colossal mistake. The deal that was set up, where Ned was going to plead guilty, take the black, go to the wall, would have removed him from the board as a political threat, and yet not cause the entire North to rise in revolt, and would have been a much better solution. This is the key insight. Joffrey chose the harsh, dramatic option. Execute the traitor, show strength, and it backfired completely. The North rebelled, the War of the Five Kings began, thousands died.
But Joffrey being like 14 years old in the book, made a very childish decision. So the harshest decision is not always the wisest, but sometimes it is.
Martin's point, real Machiavellianism isn't about being cruel. It's about being smart, knowing when to be harsh and when to be merciful, when to kill and when to spare, when to threaten and when to befriend. Joffrey failed because he chose cruelty without wisdom. But Littlefinger succeeds because he chooses helpfulness without loyalty. The real danger, people who seem safe. Book Littlefinger represents a truth about power that the show version loses. The most dangerous enemies are the ones who don't seem like enemies. You watch out for people who seem threatening. You guard against obvious enemies. You prepare for known dangers. But the helpful guy? The one who's always there when you need something? The friend who never asks for anything in return? You don't watch him. You trust him. You depend on him. And by the time you realize he's been playing you the entire time, he owns you. This is why Book Littlefinger is so much more frightening than Show Littlefinger. Show Littlefinger is a villain you can see coming. Book Littlefinger is the danger you never suspect until it's too late. The final truth.
And that's true of television show Littlefinger. But it's certainly not true of Book Littlefinger. If Book Littlefinger in the book, everybody trusts him.
George R. Martin's observation about Littlefinger reveals one of the most significant changes between his books and the HBO adaptation. The show made Littlefinger obviously sinister, a villain you could see scheming, a threat everyone recognized but couldn't quite stop. This works for television. It creates dramatic tension. It gives viewers someone to watch suspiciously. It makes Aidan Gillen's performance memorable. But it loses something crucial from the books, the horror of the invisible enemy. Book Littlefinger is terrifying because nobody sees him as a threat. He's the helpful guy, the funny guy, the guy who can always raise money when you need it. He has his mind, and he has subtlety, and he climbs, and he maneuvers. He climbs slowly, patiently. While everyone else is watching each other, he's making himself indispensable to all sides. He's everybody's friend. Not pretending to be. Actually being everybody's friend. In the sense that he genuinely helps them. He just helps them all in ways that ultimately serve his own interests. Everybody trusts him because he seems powerless. This is the key. Seeming powerless. Coming from nothing. Having no armies, no great family, no obvious threat. Just a rundown tower and some sheep. And while everyone focuses on the obvious threats, the armies, the dragons, the great houses clashing, Littlefinger quietly accumulates power through being useful and unthreatening. He's probably the most Machiavellian character in the Game of Thrones. Most Machiavellian. Not because he's the most cruel or the most dramatic, but because he perfectly embodies Machiavelli's actual principles. Appear harmless while being ruthless. Win by cunning what you can't win by force. Make yourself necessary to all sides. Show Littlefinger loses this by being obviously sinister. Everyone knows he's scheming. No one trusts him. He has no friends. Book Littlefinger succeeds precisely because everyone trusts him. Everyone depends on him. Everyone thinks he's just that helpful, funny guy. And that's what makes him the most dangerous player in the entire game. Because you can't defend against an enemy you don't recognize as an enemy. You can't guard against someone you trust. You can't fight back against someone you depend on. The show gave us a villain to watch. The books gave us a danger we don't see until it's already won. And that's the difference between obvious evil and true Machiavellian genius.